Well, hello and welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast, as we are joined today by our very final conference keynote speaker as we lead into our Exponential Australia conference this very week. It is crazy to think that tomorrow on the Gold Coast we will all be joining together, coming from all around the nation, from all across the church, and it has been an absolute delight as we lead into conference from here to hear from all of our speakers, their journeys, some of their heart for the conference, as well as the things that the Lord has laid upon their heart. And today, as I've just mentioned, we are joined by Andrew Ranucci. Andrew, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast with us today, as well as joining us this week on the Gold Coast.
Thanks, Charlie. It's a real privilege to be here, mate.
So good. Well, Andrew, you will be known to many, but also there may be plenty on the podcast as our listeners who have not heard your name or any of your background. It's always lovely to just hear a bit of a backstory to some of our guests and particularly people who join us on the podcast. So for listeners meeting you for the first time, give us a bit of a short version of your story, both with Jesus and into ministry, and even some of the formative moments that have shaped you in that journey.
Yeah, well, I guess my journey was a classic, enter a youth group, a great active youth group in the 1980s, when a lot of churches, a lot of small churches around Sydney just had really active youth groups. And I was just one of those kids who didn't come from a Christian home, but was drawn into a youth group in Year 7 at North Tarmara Church of Christ. My first experience of a Christian church, and fortunately, it was just led by just a fantastic youth pastor who did a great job at not only introducing me to Jesus, but also establishing a real great discipleship community in that youth group. And so that was my entry into Christianity. Got baptised when I was in Year 8. And then, interestingly, probably the most formative time after that, and as I look back, I realised that it actually wasn't a planned way of I didn't plan for it to be formative, but it inadvertently became formative. And that was after my HSC. I decided to have a gap year. And I, a couple of years earlier, a friend of mine and I went out west to a place called Coolabah between Nyngan and Burke. He knew a guy who had 33,000 acres out there, and him and his wife, they were in their 30s, were farming. And Johnny just said, "Hey, Andrew, let's go out there and just experience the outback." And so we did. I think we were in Year 11, and after Year 12, I thought, I'd love to go back and see Bruce again. I'd love to maybe go out there and help him on the farm. So I rang him up and I said, "Hey, Bruce, I'm having a gap year. Can I come out and just help you out on the farm? You don't need to pay me. I'll just feed me and that'll be great." So I drove out there in my baby blue combi and my surfboard. I don't know why I brought my surfboard, but I thought maybe afterwards I might be able to get some wave surfing north when I got nearer to the coast. And I brought my Bible, my red hardcover NIV Bible that we all got in Churches of Christ when we got baptised, and I ended up spending months out there, and it ended up being one of the most formative times because inadvertently there was no entertainment beyond the fire. At night I lived in the shearers' quarters. Every night I lit a fire and I sat in front of the fire and I just read God's word, because that's the only book I had. And then during the day I was often just working on my own. We were doing a lot of fencing, so a lot of the time during the day I was just on my own, just clipping wires and digging holes, and I was just thinking about what I was reading the night before. Then that night I'd go back to my shearers' quarters and I'd sit in front of the fire, read some more of God's word. There was no television, there was no distractions. And as I look back, it actually ended up being, about 3 to 4 months of solitude, silence, reading God. I ended up reading through the whole New Testament. And I came back from that trip, and I said to my youth pastor, "Hey, I've learned a few things while I've been away. I'd love to maybe start teaching them to maybe some of the younger kids in the youth group." So I started this young guys Bible study group. Then I said, "Look, could I give a few talks at youth group? Can I be a youth leader?" And they said, "Yeah, sure." And I started doing youth leadership. And then from there, it just eventuated where I found ministry to be, with young people, just so motivating and so rewarding that I ended up feeling a call to ministry. I think that was probably one of the most formative times, though. But it wasn't planned to be.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Andrew. I didn't know that about your journey, and particularly, obviously, in what you're doing today, that says so much as to some of the things that the Lord had sowed in your heart, even at that young age. And of course, you've gone on to be involved with a bunch of different things, which we're going to jump into as part of our conversation today. But I guess one of the most notable parts of your ministry journey, and, you know, before we even jump into that, I should obviously mention that you're married to the wonderful Carol. You guys have got 3 daughters, which is a big part of your journey, I'm sure, but I wanted to mention that. But one of the most notable parts of your ministry journey is your pioneering and leading of Coast Community Church on New South Wales Central Coast, including at a time multiple campuses, significant initiatives. And I guess would love to hear about that journey, both in terms of the planting of that church and the highs and lows, and I'm sure you can kind of give us some battle scars along the way. But looking back, what was harder than you expected, and what was more life-giving than what you expected as you were part of pioneering that community, leading that community for many, many years?
Wow, great question. It's so hard, isn't it, to try and summarise 26 years of church planting?
Yes.
But because it is such a roller coaster. Probably harder. What was harder, I would say, dealing with local council. I never learned about that at Bible college. And, you know, I ended up having one of the longest running development applications in Gosford City Council history.
Wow.
That went for 5 years. And then it ended up being a 10-year battle to get our facilities approved. So that was much harder than what I thought. I thought once we bought land, you know, we'll design a building, we'll get it approved.
It'll be great.
Well, that was a 10-year battle. I think also just the other thing that was harder was I didn't expect resistance from the inside. You know, I thought when you church plant, you want to reach people, you want to see people come to Christ. And fortunately, around when we planted was also around when Alpha started. And so we were very early adopters with Alpha, and we used Alpha, you know, from the mid-90s onwards. And so we had a lot of people coming to Christ, a lot of new people coming in. But what was interesting, and what I didn't expect, was that once we got to that around 100 mark, a number of people became very comfortable with us being that size. And all of a sudden, there was this resistance that came around, well, Andrew, why do we need to grow anymore? You know, we all know each other. We're all in the one service. If we go multiple services, then we won't be seeing other people, and we'll be splintered. And so I didn't expect, that was harder actually than what I thought. That's that pushing beyond 100 to 200. Once you get beyond 200 to 250, all of that changes, you know, because you have multiple services often, and you have more of a multi-cell approach to church life. But just that resistance around that 100 mark, I wasn't. No one had told me about that. And then probably the hardest thing that I just didn't expect at all, and I don't think we've got time to go into it, but those moments when you were betrayed by people closest to you. You know, and there was one particular incident where I had an elder betray me, and it was incredibly painful, and I just didn't expect that.
Yes,
that was way harder than what I ever thought.
Well, Andrew, I would love to unpack that, but as you say, I think we're going to run out of time to be able to do that today. But that is such a significant part of, I guess, any ministry journey, isn't it? You know, sometimes when the resistance is from the inside, and even the betrayal that can come with particular seasons of ministry. I guess on the flip side, would love to hear, and I recognise that you've been out of Coast Community for a number of years now, but we're going to get to some of what you're doing more currently. But what about some of the joys that came with that too, like some of the richness of seeing a faith community come into existence that did not exist prior to God calling you and Carol to be a part of that? Just that incredible multi-decade journey that you guys went on. Tell us about some of the joys of that as well.
I think some of the most life-giving aspects obviously were baptisms. I mean, for me, baptisms was always like the most life-giving events. You know, we'd always do them in the ocean, and it was always just such a thrill. and it's such an injection of meaning and excitement, of hope. But I also, what was really life-giving was also just seeing people come alive to catching a vision for a ministry in the church. I remember,
Yes.
One anecdote is, one of the guys at church, he was an executive, a leader, and he'd retired early, probably around late 50s, or maybe he might have been 60. And he said, Andrew, I'm really looking forward to, finding a way that I can serve in the church. And that around that time was when CAP started, Christians Against Poverty up in Newcastle.
Yeah, of course.
So I said to him, hey, why don't you go up to CAP and just have a day up there and just see what you think, see if you sense that maybe it could be something that we could launch at Coast Community. Anyway, Warren came back so excited, and he just caught the vision for it. And before I knew it, we'd established a CAP centre, but just it was just so life-giving, just seeing him just catch a vision and then serve it for the next dozen years, but there was young mothers who caught a vision for running like a dance club in an afternoon, and she just developed this incredible ministry. So just seeing the way that God moved in people's lives, giving people space to discover their calling, and that was always so life-giving. And probably the other thing that I found really life-giving that I just didn't expect was the way we ended up establishing a retreats ministry. That wasn't really in the playbook when we planted the church.
Yes.
But, around 2008, when I spent a couple of weeks on a retreat with Dallas Willard in his spirituality and ministry class and retreat, I came out of that really convicted around establishing a retreats ministry, which then ties back into my experience out at Coolabah. And I just didn't expect, that was just such a life-giving journey. And still is today. But again, I just didn't expect that at the start of planning a church.
It's beautiful, Andrew. Well, we're going to jump into a bit of that now, more around the way that you spend your time, because in 2018, you transitioned out of that senior pastor role and began focusing on really how you could serve pastors and leaders through soul life and through partners in ministry. And of course, you would come in contact with bucket loads of leaders from all across the country in different roles and seasons and stages of church life. Which, of course, is going to be part of some of what you're going to share at conference, and we're going to jump particularly into that with another question in a moment. But as you connect with, this wide range of leaders from across the country in deep, intimate, sharing moments, mentoring, supervision, all the ways in which you do connect with those leaders, what do you find to be the most common pain or pressure points as you connect with leaders? And even to take it a step further, what's the thing beneath the thing? What's the thing that you tend to touch upon as leaders are in critical moments or sharing some of that deep stuff that comes with the messy work of ministry? Yeah,
wow. How long have we got, Charlie? That's a great question, but it could be a podcast all on its own, couldn't it?
Yes, it could.
Some of the tensions I find amongst ministers that rise to the surface are certainly this longing and this desire to make space and time for their own personal devotional life, and yet the tension of the urgent always trumping the important, just that wrestle of seeking to find the space for their own life with God. And I see that tension almost every day that I'm with pastors. And so trying to help pastors discover a rhythm of life that can really work within the context of the pressures of ministry. I think that's something that I find is often present, and one that I'm often working with pastors with. There's always those tensions around conflict that always seem to rise up. They're always challenging, especially when they're close. When they're on a board or on a team. Finding time for emotional replenishment, Often the pastors are in the busiest stage of their life. They're raising a family, they're paying a mortgage, they're working full time in ministry. And when I ask them around, what are the things that you're doing for yourself to replenish your own emotional life? And they're like, all I hear is crickets, And that's really sad when life is at such a pace that you no longer go surfing, or you no longer play golf, or you don't see your friends as much as what you used to, so forth. So and then loneliness also often does come up as a result of that as well. But the thing beneath the thing, I mean, that's a great question, Charlie. And I guess some of the things that come up in that space will be issues of identity. You know, like the why of the busyness. Like sometimes we are our own worst enemy when it comes to the pace of ministry and digging below the surface of the why. You know, are we people pleasing too much? You know, are we trying to bolster our sense of identity through our role, and is that what's causing us to not prioritise well? That's probably a big one.
It's great. No, wow. There's a bunch of stuff there that, like you said, we could use as rabbit holes to go in a whole bunch of different directions, and I think we're going to come to one of them in just a moment, because I think that loneliness piece is massive and ties in a big way to some of what you're going to share at conference. And I guess before we get to that, and just kind of whetting the appetite of our listeners as you're particularly focusing on a topic this week, but I'd love, even before we get to that, just to kind of hear your initial impressions. I know we've gone back and forth a little bit offline just about this theme for the week ahead of being a multiplier and how leaders can have a lasting and healthy impact, not just one that's necessarily trying to change the world, but of course, as Jesus said, at the cost of losing your own soul. So I'd love to just hear your initial insights on the theme as a whole before we jump into particularly what you're going to be sharing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great theme, isn't it? I read Dave Ferguson's book, Multiplier, and it's and I assume the conference is sort of shaped around some of the thoughts in the book, obviously.
Big time.
And I just love his definition. A multiplier is a healthy, disciple-making leader who champions reproduction. It's a very simple little definition. But the fact that he's focusing on, a healthy disciple-making leader, and we all know that we reproduce who we are. That's reality.
Yes.
And so focusing on just the importance of being a spiritually, emotionally, relationally, physically healthy pastor, I think is putting our priorities in the right place. And it actually ties in so well with my own personal vision for my ministry beyond 2018. When I handed over Coast Community Church in 2018, I turned 50 the year before, and it was a real milestone. And I really felt a really strong call to working with pastors, but more so, it was a really clear vision for what I was to be doing with pastors, and the vision that I've been running with for since 2018 is my ambition is that with every pastor that I'm working with, that when the church gathers on a Sunday morning, the pastor is the healthiest person in the room. That's my vision. That they are the least anxious, they are the most rested, they are the most energized, they are the most faith-filled, they are the most expectant, they are the most gracious,
beautiful,
and kind and overflowing with love. And I really believe that if the pastor is the healthiest person in the room, that the church will be the healthiest it can possibly be. And so when I read Dave's book, I thought, it totally aligned with my own personal vision for the work that I do with pastors, and just the importance of just seeing pastors become the healthiest version of themselves.
Yeah, wow. Well, I'm so delighted to hear both of that synergy, Andrew, and obviously the heart that you're therefore going to bring to your session and your time at conference this week. And your particular keynote this week focuses upon the inner gauges of physical and relational health, particularly focusing on that relational space. And I guess just to kind of, again, don't want to dive into it too deeply, don't want to steal your thunder for this week, but why do you think this is such a significant piece of ministry health? And on the flip side of that, how can we multiply who we are as much as the ministries we long to see planted established? You kind of use that great idiom that we reproduce who we are. If relational health is so important, then how do we multiply that well in the ministries that we lead?
Yeah, that's great. Again, I'm so glad we're focusing on this topic, because it's a topic that's not only big for church leaders, but I think it's actually big in in society. In fact, I was reading a survey done by the Centre on American Life in 2021 that said that how many years ago was it now? I think it was around 1990. 3% of people experienced or had zero friends. Would say that they had zero close friends. And in 2021, that rose to 15%. And some studies now are saying it's closer to 20% that of people will say that they have zero close friends. That's 1 in 5 people in society. And I think pastors struggle even more because of their dual roles. And so I think it could even be 25% for pastors, maybe 1 in 4 pastors potentially could be in a place where they have zero close friends. You know, those 2 a.m. friends where you can call up when things really go pear-shaped. How many pastors have those friends? Those friends who will journey with them beyond the location where they're serving right now. Lifelong close friends. And so it is a pandemic across the world, loneliness. So it's a big issue in society, but I think it's an even bigger issue for pastors because of the power differential that pastors have with
big time.
With their congregation. And therefore, if all of your social time is spent within the church context, the chances are it's going to be a challenge to steward life-giving, long-term spiritual friends. And that's why I'm excited to talk about this topic at the conference, because one of the things that I talk about with the pastors that I support, you know, as a supervisor and as a mentor and a spiritual director, is, you know, what life-giving relationships are you stewarding outside of your local church context? Because you need at least, you know, 1, 2, or 3 friendships, spiritual friendships that you're stewarding outside your local context, so that no matter what's going on in the church, there's this stability of life-giving relationships. And sadly, whenever I say that, you know, with a new client, it often comes as a real challenge because they know they've let things go, they let things slip, and I get it. You know, it's I did as well. You know, but one of my regrets was that I did that as well. Unfortunately, since 2018, I've been able to reconnect with some of those childhood friends, which has been wonderful. So I think it's such an important topic, and as we develop strategies ourselves for nurturing life-giving spiritual friendships, I really believe then we'll be able to model so that we can reproduce that level of health of friendships in those that we lead. Yeah,
it's beautiful. And you're so right, it kind of bodes so well for, of course, the churches that we want to lead and be a part of, are those of deep belonging, spiritual friendship, recognising the complex dynamics that come with being a leader in those communities, and yet we can't invite others into something that we ourselves have not discovered ourselves. Andrew, would love just for our final question, particularly related to planters. Of course, at Exponential this week, we're going to have bucket loads of both current church planters, those who are praying and considering planting churches, existing church leaders, denominational leaders, and many, many others who kind of fit into different roles and capacities. But I'd love to ask a final question, particularly focused on planters. And this is from one who has planted many years ago, and yet some of the principles and rhythms are very much the same. As someone who has planted, coached others, what are the most predictable relational and emotional challenges that you have witnessed as you've kind of spent time with others, particularly, I guess, in that first 1 to 5 years? And you've already raised some of them, but how could church planters, and I guess even those who are in team, prepare for some of those challenges that do and will exist?
Yeah, I think I know when I managed to, you know, get the church planting grant from Churches of Christ in 1992, the year we got married, and then 93 went up to the Central Coast. We moved an hour and a half north of Sydney from where I grew up, and where all my friendship base was, and we got married the same year or the year before, and so what I ended up doing, as I guess a lot of church planters do, they focus all their energy on the community where they're serving, and it was wonderful. But I think in those first 5 years, I wished I had an older mentor say to me, Andrew, make sure that you take 2 or 3 friendships with you from Sydney. Don't neglect them. Don't neglect those friendships that were so important and so formative for you. And fortunately, I've been able to continue to steward some of those later on, but only because they were very patient. But I really think in those first 5 years, one of the dangers is that you throw all your energy into the new location where you're planting, and you don't steward those really important and life-giving relationships that you had in your previous location. We desperately need lifelong. I'm going to be hitting this in the conference again, so you'll be hearing this a lot. But we desperately need to be stewarding lifelong, life-giving spiritual friendships.
Yeah.
We just, our soul needs them, and yet, as church planters, we can be just so focused on the mission, so focused on the church that we're planting, that we can just let those slide. Because what are they? They're important, but they're not urgent,
Yes.
So the urgency of next Sunday. Sundays come around so damn quickly. I'm sure they come around every 3 days. That's what it feels like. It doesn't feel like 7 days between Sundays. And when we neglect those friendships that could be alongside us when we have our bad days, I think we've paid the price for it.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, there's so much in there, and as you say, there's going to be a bunch more that you have to share this week as part of our keynote, and also joining in on one of our next gen streams. But it's such important work to have these conversations around the things that are causing ministry leaders to come unstuck, but also to lose their flourishing. And that's such an important part of what we envisage this week to be. And so, my friend, we're so looking forward to having you with us in just a couple of days' time, being part of conference. It's been an absolute joy and a delight to have you on the podcast today, and we really, really appreciate it. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Charlie. It's been an honour.